Thank you, Sabrina. I have to say, a very difficult panel to follow, but I think a lot of themes that I will be talking about this evening um, have really come out of this conversation, even though I was not quite sure what the questions would be asked. So, dear excellencies, esteemed guests, and friends, thank you all for being here this evening. I am especially grateful to the Congress of Bosniaks of North America, Islamic Community of North America and Bosniaks, and the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center for coming together to commemorate the genocide committed against Bosniaks in Srebrenica in July of 1995, a tragedy that was part of a broader genocide which aimed at the eradication of Bosniaks throughout Bosnia and Herzegovina, from Prijedor to Srebrenica. In particular, I wish to acknowledge Selma Porča, the executive director of the Congress of Bosniaks of North America, for her unparalleled commitment to ensuring that we, Bosniak Americans, continue to educate our fellow Americans through community building and storytelling about the atrocities committed in Bosnia and Herzegovina in the 1990s. I am truly honored to serve our Bosniak community alongside Selma. In learning about the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, I recognize that our organizations share a common mission of learning from history and, in doing so, inspiring common human values of equality, social justice, and recognition of our shared humanity. Your website states, quote, "Take history to heart, take a stand for humanity," end of quote. Like our hosts this evening, who envision a world where we stand for humanity, I envision a world where our fundamental rights to freedom, equality, and life are within reach for all. With that mission in mind, I wish to share with you how my own life story inspires my work on hate prevention and dignity for all. During World War II, my mother's grandfather resolutely rejected fascism. One of his sons was taken to a German concentration camp, while the other armed himself with a pitchfork to fight the Nazis. I never met my father's dad, who also resisted fascism, but I was privileged to have grown up with my grandmother, Nura, who shared our family's stories of resilience to hate. One story I recall involved an encounter with fascist forces. Held at gunpoint, she watched as they raided her home, demanding her to disclose where she hid weapons for her husband and the resistance against the Nazis. Even when faced with the threat of the loss of not only her own life, but the lives of her 5 young sons, including my father, Mehmed, my grandmother refused. The Nazis failed to locate the weapons she stashed under that season's corn my grandmother and her children harvested. Neither my grandmother nor any of my family members were ordained or recognized for their courage to resist fascism while they themselves were under occupation. But they all discovered their true selves as they struggled for freedom and the dignity of all people. None of my family members were Jewish. They were Bosnian Muslims, Bosniaks, who found themselves stateless in 1941, after Yugoslavia was occupied by both Nazi Germany and Nazi Croatia. As rumors of Nazi terrorism spread, influential Bosnian Muslim clergy and Islamic scholars bravely signed a set of public resolutions condemning the horrific violence targeting Europe's Jewish, Roma, and accompanying minority groups. These resolutions were openly signed by Muslim clergy and intellectuals in towns like Prijedor, Sarajevo, Mostar, Banja Luka, Bijeljina, Tuzla, Zenica, Bosanska Dubica, and Bugojno. These are the same towns where Muslims during the 1990s Bosnian genocide were displaced from their homes, bombed, starved, raped, threatened with complete eradication, taken to concentration camps, and some even forced to wear white armbands to be labeled the dehumanized other. While the Muslim resolutions of 1941 had local variations in style and expression representing the range of communities that penned and endorsed them, all of them, without exception, delivered the same message to the occupying fascist force that we, Bosnian Muslims, condemn all forms of discrimination and mass atrocities that target Jewish, Roma, and other minorities. These historic resolutions show that my family's remarkable determination to risk their lives to resist hate is not exceptional, but rather at the heart of many untold and therefore unheard stories of Bosnian Muslims' history. They reflect a collective determination of Bosniaks as a people who stood in support of common human values and fundamental rights to freedom and life for all when almost no one would. In fact, the Bosniak community became amongst the first groups in Europe to publicly denounce fascism and the Holocaust. In 1941, many were looking the other way. Many of the Muslim signatories of these historic resolutions were killed, persecuted, or imprisoned for being Muslim, whether during or after the Second World War. A few lived during the Bosnian genocide in the 1990s, witnessing the genocide against their own people, including the Srebrenica Genocide, where on July 11th, 8,372 men and boys were executed for who they were, Bosniak and Muslim. It is not easy to kill thousands of people in a matter of only a few days. Hate and dehumanization are required to ignite and continuously fuel that effort. But these stories of Bosniaks' resilience to hate serve as a powerful lesson and a reminder how important it is that we make them visible in our curricula, in our classrooms, in our living rooms, and in educational events like this evening's commemoration of the Srebrenica Genocide. It is also in these stories of interfaith solidarity and courage that I find hope as I watch the unrelenting brutalities unfold across the Middle East. When either Jews or Muslims are targeted, both of our communities are destined to suffer. Sadly, the hate, othering, and dehumanization is going global. I fear that we may not adequately appreciate the lessons of the past genocides. Segregating communities into us and them is the first step in Gregory Stanton's 10 stages of genocide, grievously exacerbated when accompanied by dehumanization and the denial of one another's humanity and suffering. This pathway to genocide is a facet in the history of human experience that many in this room tonight not only recognize, but know firsthand. 30 years ago, my life forever changed when identity-based violence erupted into genocide as Serbian and Serb forces targeted Bosnian Muslims through systematic starvation, rape, and killings. My own city of Bihać was under siege, my home, family, and friends bombed and starved for nearly 1,200 days. In July of 1995, the largest genocidal act of mass killing in Europe since the Holocaust took place in Srebrenica, when Serb militants slaughtered Bosniak men and boys under the pretext of dehumanization and their racial and ethnic impurity. My hometown of Bihać, we were told, was going to be next. During this unbearable period of my life, on a good day, a friend of a friend was killed. On a bad day, it was a friend or a family member. You can imagine how hating our aggressors would have felt at that time, conceivably a natural and defensive response to our own suffering. I, along with my fellow Bosniaks, was lucky to have listened to the stories from our past that instilled a lifelong resilience to hate in all of us who shared this stage tonight, and who continue to work to undermine hate in all its forms. After the war, I immigrated to the United States, dedicating my life to the prevention of hate. The world may have promised never again, but multiple atrocities have targeted groups since then, including the Tutsis, Rohingyas, Uyghurs, and most recently, Hamas's terror attack that killed an estimated 1,200 Israelis, and Israel's killing of more than 38,000 Palestinians, most of them women and children. In each instance, there has been unconscionable desertion of our common humanity and the normalization of hate-fueled violence. So what are we to do to stop this relentless cycle of hate-fueled violence and ensure that the lessons of the past instruct our present? First, more weapons and more killings aren't an answer. My research shows that the pathway to hate-fueled violence is initiated not by one's desire to harm another human being, but by their feelings of invisibility, dehumanization, and a lack of belonging that the society has failed to address effectively. This is why we must cultivate more empathetic societies that reject and end the teaching of superiority of any one group in any society. That begins with leadership. Political, cultural, academic, religious, and civic leaders must acknowledge the mass suffering of groups outside of their own and find common ground with people who the world is trying to portray as their enemy. We need more leaders who will repudiate genocide denialism. Genocide survivors know that denialism is an open wound that never heals. Denialism is also a stark warning sign that society is veering off course, and it's a signal that has been sounding in many places across the globe with increasing frequency. It's little coincidence that the same far-right groups simultaneously deny the existence of genocides like the Holocaust and are inspired by the genocide against Bosnian Muslims. Genocide denialism that dehumanizes the other emanates from the same dangerous undercurrent that rejects facts, rewrites history, and fuels the next generation of extremism. If there's one message I hope I can offer you this evening, it is that genocide education is a vital bulwark against this tide of hate. We have the power to address the roots to violence, the experiences, motivations such as the rejection, alienation, despair, anger, dehumanization, racism, and supremacy, because those forms of othering and targeting happen in our communities. When we permit supremacy of any one group over our fellow communities, or when we enable or experience the silencing of our voices not being listened to, the feeling of lacking recognition, not being seen, and the absence of representation, not encountering oneself in stories, in the museums, classrooms, media, and in the political and economic fabric of our societies, the ensuing anger can take a violent form. Whenever we're shaken by the contemporary rise of hate, we must return to the roots of belonging, community, genuine dialogue, and mutual respect for all to steady us in the most violent of storms. More than 80 years ago, my family was faced with the choice: be swept by tides of tribalism and dehumanization, or stand strong in our shared humanity and promote peace. Today, the world faces a similar crisis of humanity. The choice is a moral one, and ours to make. If we fail to recognize our shared humanity, then the deadly realities of hate-fueled violence that can quickly culminate in genocide will haunt us for decades to come. When I look out into the audience today, I am hopeful, because hope, it is said, is the home of possibility. Some say eradicating hate is complicated. I say it is easy when our will is rooted in our humanity and when we share belief of being equal to one another and being one with what surrounds us. Thank you.